Title: The Price of Betrayal. In a quiet suburban town, where every house felt like part of a perfect family portrait, there lived a man named Ethan. A quiet, hard-working individual, he had everything he had ever dreamed of: a wife, a daughter, a career that seemed to be on the rise. But behind the facade of smiles and polite conversation, things had begun to unravel in ways he couldn't see coming. Ethan's wife, Sarah, had always been a woman of strong will. She was intelligent, driven, and fiercely protective of their family, or so he thought. As the years went by, however, subtle changes began to creep into their marriage. It wasn't anything overt at first, just a few more late nights at the office, a few more arguments over small things. But soon, Ethan realized the deep cracks in their bond. His own sense of security in his family started to waver as Sarah's behavior shifted in ways he couldn't understand. Then, it happened. One day, while Ethan was away on a business trip, Sarah pulled off an act that would send shockwaves through their entire world. She poisoned their daughter's perception of him, telling her stories that painted Ethan as an absent, unreliable father. It was like a slow poison seeping into their daughter's heart, until one day, she no longer wanted to have anything to do with him. Ethan tried everything to salvage their relationship. He called, he wrote, he begged for a chance to explain, but Sarah had taken control of the narrative. She made sure Ethan had no access to his daughter. A brutal, isolating silence filled his life. The pain of being shut out of his daughters. Life was excruciating, but what cut deeper was the realization that the woman he had loved, the one he trusted, had not only turned his family against him, but had destroyed his image in their eyes. Sarah had poisoned not just their food, but the very foundation of their family. Years passed, but Ethan never gave up hope. He moved on with his career, building his reputation, but always with a hole in his heart. He never truly healed, never truly found peace. He kept pushing forward, trying to forget, but the wounds lingered. Then one day, a phone call came. It was from his old friend Marcus, a colleague who had once been close to Ethan and who still worked at the company where Ethan had held a prominent position. He spoke with an air of disbelief. "Ethan, I don't know how to say this, but Sarah, she's been seeing your boss." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. His first instinct was to deny it, to laugh it off as some cruel joke. But Marcus's voice was too serious. The truth was undeniable. For years, Ethan had wrestled with the betrayal of his family, his wife's manipulation, and the painful distance from his daughter. But this was something altogether different. It was an insult to the very core of his identity. Sarah had not only turned his family against him, she had now sullied his career, his hard work, and everything he had built. But the greatest betrayal of all came with the realization that, after all these years, Sarah's infidelity was not just an affair. It was a calculated, manipulative move to control Ethan's life from all angles. The affair with his boss was the final piece in a larger game. Ethan was left with a choice: continue to dwell on the past or find a way to rise above the ruin she had left in her wake. But how? How could someone who had been so deeply wronged by the people they loved ever trust again? How could he face his daughter after all this time? This narrative touches on betrayal, the pain of being alienated from loved ones, and the long road to self-healing. The journey of understanding and reclaiming one's life after such a situation would be a painful and slow process, but it's not without hope. The Price of Betrayal. Part 2. Ethan sat in his dimly lit office, staring at the cityscape below. His mind raced, a storm of emotions swirling inside him. Anger, hurt, confusion, every single feeling he had buried for years resurfaced in that single phone call. His hands trembled as he picked up his phone, dialing a number he had never thought he would have to call. The private investigator he hired was a man named Robert Hale, someone whose reputation for discretion and thoroughness had reached Ethan through a friend of a friend. The decision to hire Robert wasn't easy. It felt like accepting the bitter reality that his life had been irreparably torn apart by lies and deceit. But Ethan needed answers, something concrete. He could no longer be in the dark, waiting for Sarah's truth to fall from her lips in a moment of remorse that would likely never come. He needed control, something to hold on to in the chaos. The next morning, Robert showed up at Ethan's office, a middle-aged man in a dark suit with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through the surface. Ethan didn't offer pleasantries. There was no point. The air was thick with tension. "Mr. Hale," Ethan said, his voice steady, "I need you to investigate my wife, Sarah. I have reason to believe she's been cheating on me with my boss." Robert nodded without a word, a professional silence that seemed to echo the coldness Ethan was beginning to feel inside. The man's eyes flicked toward the window, assessing Ethan's situation without speaking. "I'll need the details," Robert said. "Your full trust. We'll need to work quickly but carefully. We'll gather evidence that could be used in court if necessary." Ethan exhaled sharply, then spoke, his words clipped with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "I need to know everything. How long it's been going on, where they meet, everything. I need to know how deep this goes." As Robert took down the details, Ethan realized that despite everything, a part of him still wanted to protect Sarah. He wanted to believe that somehow this was all just a misunderstanding. But deep down, he knew he was being naive. Sarah had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Days turned into weeks. Ethan threw himself into his work, unable to focus on anything else. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart skipped a beat. But each time it was just another mundane update or work-related message. The silence was maddening, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. Then, one afternoon, Robert called. "The investigation is complete," Robert said in his usual calm tone. But this time, there was an edge of finality to it. "I've gathered the evidence. It's as you suspected. Your wife has been meeting with your boss on several occasions. I have photos, videos, and even records of their communications. This affair has been going on for over a year." The words stung, but they were what Ethan had been waiting for, the validation, the proof. He sat back in his chair, staring at the document Robert sent over. The pictures were clear, showing Sarah and his boss, William Richards, leaving a high-end restaurant late at night, their body language too intimate to be casual. In some of the photos, they were holding hands. In others, they shared secretive glances, the kind of looks that told a story only they knew. The truth was laid bare before him, but it only made the pain sharper. Ethan had trusted William, had admired him. To think that the man he had worked for, the one who had encouraged him to climb the corporate ladder, had been sleeping with his wife, it was almost too much to bear. That evening, after receiving the final evidence from Robert, Ethan stood at the kitchen counter looking out the window, the weight of the betrayal settling in like a heavy fog. His thoughts drifted to his daughter. Would she ever know the truth? Could he ever make her understand that despite what Sarah had told her, he was still the father who loved her unconditionally? But he couldn't focus on that now. He had a decision to make. He thought of Sarah, her face as she had looked on the day she told him she wanted a divorce. How could he have known then that it was all a calculated move? How could he have understood that she was already seeing another man? That everything, the pain, the distance, the lies, had been part of a plan to control him? The next steps were unclear. Part of him wanted to confront her immediately, but he knew that would only lead to more chaos. He needed to think this through, to decide how to proceed in a way that would give him the justice he deserved. The following morning, Ethan met with his lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Rachel Grant, who had a reputation for handling complex, high-stakes cases. She listened carefully as Ethan explained the situation, showing her the evidence Robert had gathered. "Sarah's actions are not just a betrayal in marriage," Rachel said after a long pause, her voice measured. The price of betrayal. Part 3. The days that followed the meeting with Rachel were a blur for Ethan. He spent his time pacing the halls of his apartment, reviewing the evidence, the photos, the messages over and over again. He could barely comprehend the weight of what he was about to do. Confronting Sarah wasn't an option yet. There was too much at stake: custody of his daughter, his career, the reputation he had worked so hard to build. His mind kept returning to the same question. Why? Why had Sarah done this to him, to their family? Hadn't they shared everything? There were no signs that things were so broken between them. But as he combed through every interaction, every moment they'd spent together over the past few years, he began to wonder if he had missed something all along. One evening, as Ethan was reviewing more documents in his office, he received a call from Robert. The investigator had been following Sarah and William more closely in recent days, trying to piece together the full extent of their affair, and Robert had some important news. "I've uncovered something new," Robert said, his voice low and serious. "They've been meeting not just for dinners, but also at a remote cabin outside the city. I've got the address. There's more. Sarah's been withdrawing money from your joint accounts and using it to fund trips and gifts for him." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. More? He had already been dealing with the gut-wrenching pain of his wife's betrayal, but now it seemed there was a financial betrayal as well. The cabin, the secret trips. It all painted a picture of a life Ethan had never been a part of. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. Sarah wasn't just cheating with his boss, she was completely detached from their life. She had been living in a parallel world, one he was never meant to see. "Do you have any proof of their financial activities?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "I've got the withdrawal records," Robert replied. "I'll send them over. It's clear they've been using your money to fund this affair. It's not just emotional betrayal, it's financial fraud." Ethan felt his world crumble a little more. The trust, the marriage, the finances, everything had been violated. The next day, Rachel sat with Ethan again, going over the new evidence. She examined the bank statements, the cabin information, and the photos of Sarah and William leaving the cabin together. She looked up at him, her gaze firm. "You've got a solid case, Ethan," she said, the sharp edge in her voice not lost on him. "This goes beyond a simple affair. Sarah's actions could potentially lead to criminal charges, depending on how far we want to push this. But before we take this public, we need to think about the bigger picture. The most important thing is securing your daughter's future." Ethan swallowed hard. His daughter was still his priority, even more so now that he knew the full extent of Sarah's betrayal. He had to make sure she was safe, that she wasn't hurt by the fallout of this ugly situation. The last thing he wanted was for her to get caught in the middle of a war between her parents. "What's the next step?" Ethan asked. Rachel leaned forward, her tone businesslike. "We can send Sarah a formal demand letter detailing the evidence we've collected. It'll give her a chance to settle this without going to court. We'll make it clear that we have everything. Her financial misuse, the affair, everything. If she refuses to settle, we go to trial." For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was regaining some control over his life. He wasn't helpless anymore, forced to wait for Sarah's manipulations to unfold. He had evidence, he had a lawyer, and he had a plan. The demand letter was sent that afternoon. Ethan's heart raced as he signed the documents. The letter wasn't just a legal move, it was a statement. It was his way of telling Sarah that he wasn't going to let her control the narrative anymore. That evening, as Ethan sat in the quiet of his apartment, a thought flickered across his mind. How much longer would he have to live like this? The pain, the anger, the shame, it was all consuming. Every time he saw the pictures of Sarah with William, every time he saw the withdrawal records, it felt like his world was being ripped apart, piece by piece. But then he thought of his daughter. He couldn't give up. He couldn't let Sarah continue her manipulative games. He had to do this for her. The next morning, as Ethan was preparing for another day at work, he received an unexpected call. It was Sarah. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. "I got your letter." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He'd been expecting this, but hearing her voice on the other end still made him tense. "I want to talk," she continued. "Can we meet?" Ethan clenched his fists. This was it, the confrontation he had dreaded but knew was inevitable. The price of betrayal. Part 4. The weeks after the confrontation with Sarah felt like a constant tug-of-war for Ethan. Despite everything he had uncovered, there was still one burning question at the back of his mind. What else had she hidden? The financial betrayal, the affair, it all seemed too calculated, too methodical. Sarah had always been the kind of person to cover her tracks, to think ahead and stay in control. It wasn't enough for him to have the evidence he already had. Ethan needed to know everything, every last detail of how his world had been torn apart. He had already uncovered Sarah's secret life, her affair with his boss, William, and the misuse of their finances. But there was something inside Ethan telling him that there was more to the story, something buried beneath the surface. And he wasn't about to let it go. One evening, after a long day at work, Ethan sat in his apartment, staring at the bank statements and photographs he had collected. His mind kept returning to the same nagging feeling. Sarah had been careful. Too careful. What if there was something he had missed? He knew Sarah's habits well, her need for privacy, her penchant for keeping things locked away. Ethan's mind flickered to the small safe in their bedroom, a place where Sarah used to keep her personal belongings, important documents, jewelry, even a few keepsakes from their earlier years together. Could she have hidden something there? The thought lingered like a shadow. Ethan had never been one to snoop, but at this point, it didn't feel like an invasion of privacy. It felt like survival. His whole life had been built on lies, and it was time to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. He rose from his desk and walked toward their bedroom. His heart pounded as he approached the small safe tucked away in the corner of the closet. It was the kind of thing Sarah would never have thought to hide from him, not in a million years. The thought of breaking into it sent a wave of guilt through him, but he quickly shoved it aside. The stakes were too high. The safe was locked, but it wasn't difficult to find the combination. Ethan had been the one to set it up years ago when they had first moved into the house, and while Sarah had always handled the contents, he had a good memory for numbers. He entered the combination, and with a soft click, the safe popped open. Inside were a few papers, some old letters, and a stack of bills. Ethan flipped through them with increasing impatience. He knew what he was looking for, a smoking gun, something that could confirm his suspicions about how deep Sarah's deceit had gone. Then, tucked underneath the letters, he found something, a small manila envelope, sealed shut. He hesitated for a moment, his fingers trembling as he pulled it out. His instincts told him that this was it, the final piece of the puzzle. He ripped it open, his eyes scanning the contents. What he found was more than he had expected. Inside were a series of receipts, hotel stays, flights, and dining expenses, all from locations he knew well. The dates were recent, far too recent to be coincidental. But there was one receipt in particular that caught his eye. A luxurious resort, in a tropical location, dated just 2 weeks before. It was clear. Sarah had been taking trips with William, just the two of them. They had been getting away, spending time together in secret, while Ethan was none the wiser. The pieces fell into place like a jigsaw puzzle. Sarah's affair wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a full-fledged relationship, one that she had hidden meticulously from him for months. But what hurt even more were the letters inside the envelope. They weren't just business receipts. They were personal letters, intimate exchanges between Sarah and William. The words in them weren't just about love, they were about plans. They spoke of a future, of dreams of starting a life together once Ethan was out of the picture. They spoke of Sarah's desire to escape their life, to leave everything behind and start fresh with William. Ethan's heart sank. His hands shook as he continued to read the letters, his mind spiraling as the truth became more and more clear. Sarah hadn't just been unfaithful. She had been plotting her escape, planning her new life with William while he was still in the dark, trying to save a marriage that was already lost. The pain was overwhelming, but it was also a revelation. Ethan had been right all along. Sarah had been playing him for a fool, pretending to be the devoted wife while she built a secret life behind his back. And now, he had the evidence to prove it. Ethan carefully placed the letters and receipts back into the envelope, taking a deep breath as he closed the safe. He stood there for a moment, his mind racing. What was his next move? He couldn't confront Sarah with this information, not yet. He needed time to process everything, to figure out how he could use this to his advantage. The Price of Betrayal, Part 5. The aftermath of Ethan's discovery seemed to carry an air of finality. The pieces of his broken marriage were scattered, and the bitter reality of Sarah's betrayal was now a public spectacle. However, as much as Ethan struggled with his own pain, there was someone else who was beginning to feel the weight of the consequences. William Richards, Sarah's lover, and Ethan's boss. William had always been the embodiment of charm and success, a man who seemingly had everything: wealth, power, influence. He was the kind of boss that everyone admired, who could sway decisions with a smile or a persuasive word. But beneath the surface, there had always been something off about him. His carefully cultivated persona, the polished exterior, was a mask that barely hid the man behind it, a man who, despite his success, had always been driven by a need for validation, for control. When he first met Sarah, it was under the pretense of mentorship. She was ambitious, driven, and willing to please. William saw in her an opportunity for both pleasure and power. He knew she was married, knew she had a family, but the allure of someone so beautiful, so willing, was impossible to resist. The affair began slowly, in hidden corners of the office, with stolen moments that escalated into weekend getaways and nights spent at expensive hotels. The more Sarah fed him her attention, the more William indulged in the affair, blind to the consequences, convinced that he could keep everything under control. But now, the situation had spiraled out of his control. William sat in his plush office, the blinds drawn, the lights dim. His fingers tapped restlessly on the desk, his mind replaying the events of the last few weeks. The calm facade he had maintained for so long was starting to crack, and he felt it, like a dam ready to burst. The moment he had found out that Ethan had hired a lawyer and uncovered evidence of the affair, everything changed. What had been a secret pleasure was now a ticking time bomb. His phone rang, breaking his thoughts. He glanced at the caller ID and saw it was Sarah. He answered it on the second ring, his voice strained. "Sarah." "William." Her voice was soft, almost pleading. "What's going to happen? Have you talked to Ethan? Is he going to go public with this?" The desperation in her voice made William's stomach churn. The fear, the uncertainty. It was exactly what he had been avoiding. He had been living in a bubble of denial, thinking that his position, his power, would somehow shield him from the fallout. But now, that bubble had burst, and the reality was setting in. "I don't know yet," William said, trying to sound calm, though his heart raced. "Ethan's not an idiot, Sarah. He's going to make sure this hits the press if we don't. Handle this carefully. We need to keep this contained." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then spoke with a tremor in her voice. "I don't want this to ruin everything. My family, my life. What have we done?" William exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her words sink in. He had never considered the full consequences of his actions. not the long-term damage to Sarah, not the destruction to his career, and certainly not the destruction to his marriage. His wife had no idea about his affair, and though they had grown distant over the years, the truth would be a blow that would crush everything he had built. He had always prided himself on control, on keeping his life and career in perfect order. But now, all of it was crumbling. The affair with Sarah had been reckless, impulsive, and beneath everything he was ashamed of it. But even more so, he was terrified. If Ethan went public, William's reputation, his business deals, and his entire career would be on the line. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was about survival. The guilt gnawed at him, especially after he spent more time reflecting on how it all began. When Sarah first came to him, eager to climb the corporate ladder, he had seen the hunger in her eyes, the ambition that mirrored his own in younger years. She wasn't like other employees who worked hard but stayed in their lane. Sarah wanted more, and she had the drive to get it. At first he told himself that the affair was just a distraction, a harmless indulgence. But as time went on, he had grown to rely on her, emotionally even, something he hadn't expected. She had begun to open up about her life, about her marriage, with Ethan, and William found himself listening to her, sympathizing with her. But now he was disgusted with himself. The affair had poisoned not just Sarah's life, but his own. He had put everything on the line. All for what? A temporary escape? A fleeting connection that could never replace the stability of his career and family? William sat up straighter, gripping the arms of his chair as he thought about the next steps. He needed to fix this. The price of betrayal. Part 6. After weeks of pain and turmoil, Ethan's heart hardened. The overwhelming betrayal of Sarah, his wife, had not only torn apart his family but also humiliated him on every level. The public shame, the quiet, whispers behind his back, and the cold stares from friends and colleagues had worn him down. But what stung more than anything else was the realization that he had been living in a lie that Sarah had spun so meticulously that he had never seen the threads unraveling. Yet in the depths of his pain, Ethan found something far more dangerous than heartbreak: anger. It wasn't just anger at Sarah for what she had done to their marriage. It was anger at the people who had enabled it, at William, his boss, who had taken advantage of his trust. He had been the one to mentor Ethan, the one to give him opportunities, the one who had pulled the strings of his career, and now he had also taken what was most precious to him: his family. Ethan didn't want to simply move on. He didn't want to just accept that this had happened and walk away. No, this was too big, too deep. He needed revenge. He needed to make them pay for the damage they had caused. It wasn't about money or even public humiliation. It was about taking back control, about making them feel what he had felt for months: betrayal, despair, and the crushing weight of knowing that everything he thought he knew had been destroyed. Ethan took a deep breath and sat down at his desk. His mind raced with ideas, each one more elaborate and calculated than the last. This wouldn't be some petty retaliation. No. He would make sure they understood the consequences of their actions, and he would do it with precision. He started by thinking of Sarah. She was the one who had, in his eyes, caused the greatest harm. She had deceived him, taken their life together and tossed it aside like it was nothing. But she had underestimated him. She had underestimated his ability to plan, to stay calm, and to wait for the right moment. She thought she could have it all: her affair, her family, her new life with William. But she couldn't. Not if Ethan had any say in it. The first step was clear. He needed to strip away her illusion of control. Sarah had always prided herself on her image: the perfect mother, the devoted wife, the successful professional. It was time to dismantle that image piece by piece. Ethan had seen how important her reputation was to her, how carefully she curated every interaction, every social media post, and every conversation with their friends. He would use that to his advantage. The next morning, Ethan met with Rachel, the lawyer who had helped him uncover Sarah's infidelity. They had spent countless hours together strategizing for the custody battle. But this meeting wasn't about that. This was about revenge. "I need your help," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. "I want to make sure Sarah and William never get the chance to do this again. To anyone." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about more than just a legal battle, aren't you?" Ethan nodded. "Much more. I need you to help me gather everything I can about Sarah's financial dealings. I'm talking about more than the assets she's trying to hide. I want to know everything. The things she's kept from me, the things she's done behind my back." Rachel's eyes glinted with a mix of curiosity and understanding. "You're planning to expose her?" "I want to take away her power," Ethan said. "I want her to understand that she can't get away with this." Rachel nodded slowly, tapping her fingers on the table. "I'll dig into her finances, but you need to be careful, Ethan. Revenge isn't something you can walk away from easily. You don't want to end up losing more than you already have." "I know the risks," Ethan replied. "But this is the only way I'll ever feel like I have some control again." Over the next few weeks, Ethan executed his plan with the kind of precision that only someone who had been wronged could possess. He started with the most obvious move. He began gathering evidence on Sarah's financial indiscretions. Everything, from hidden accounts to extravagant spending on her trips with William. But Ethan knew that if he was going to truly hurt Sarah, he needed to go deeper. While Rachel focused on the legal aspects, Ethan started his own investigation, learning everything he could about the people who had been involved in the affair. He knew that Sarah's relationship with William had been a careful balance of power, with each party holding something over the other. He needed to figure out what that was and how to use it to his advantage. Through a combination of digging, through old emails, tracking phone records, and using his connections at work, Ethan discovered something that made his heart race. William had been funneling money from the company into a series of private offshore accounts. The Price of Betrayal. Part 7. Ethan's resolve had solidified into something cold and unyielding as he moved forward with his investigation into Sarah's betrayal. He no longer saw himself as the devastated husband. He was now a man on a mission, driven by the need to uncover the full scope of what had happened, who Sarah had become, and how deep the web of lies ran. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about finding the truth, reclaiming what he had lost, and protecting what little remained of his dignity. After the initial shock of Sarah's affair with William, Ethan had turned his focus to methodically piecing together the puzzle of her deception. The lawyer Rachel had helped with the first steps, digging into financial records and preparing for a potential custody battle, but Ethan knew he needed to go beyond the surface. There were too many questions still unanswered, too many inconsistencies in Sarah's story that he couldn't ignore. She had made it clear in their conversations. She was not a woman who could be trusted. Ethan had learned to think like a detective, spending countless hours at night combing through old emails, texts, and social media accounts. His fingers flew over the keyboard as he retraced their life together, digging deeper into the time when things had started to fall apart. It wasn't until he unearthed a set of seemingly benign emails between Sarah and William, exchanged in the months before the affair was revealed, that Ethan found the first clue that would unlock everything. There were subtle hints in the language, comments that alluded to late-night meetings, casual discussions about business trips, and plans for private dinners that had never been mentioned before. Sarah had been clever, but not clever enough, to erase all traces of her betrayal. The emails gave Ethan more than enough to go on. He wasn't just hunting for proof of their affair now. He was looking for a pattern. Every small detail in their communications told a story of two people carefully navigating their worlds to avoid suspicion. Ethan realized that the affair wasn't just an act of selfishness. It was part of a much larger plan, a plan that had affected not only their marriage but his entire life. Sarah had kept secrets, many of them, and now it was time to expose them all. The next step in Ethan's investigation involved something far more personal. He began to scrutinize Sarah's behavior over the last year, tracing the subtle changes that had taken place before and during the affair. There were small clues he had overlooked in the past: the extra time spent on her phone, the unexplained absences, the hollow explanations that never quite added up. Ethan began to question his own role in the unraveling of their marriage. Was he blind to what was happening right under his nose? Had Sarah's affair been a consequence of something missing in their relationship, or had she simply been driven by greed, ambition, or lust? The more he dug, the more he saw just how carefully Sarah had orchestrated the lies. She had convinced herself that she could have it all: the love of her family and the thrill of her illicit relationship with William. But it was more than that. There was something darker underneath the surface, something that Ethan hadn't fully understood until now. Sarah had been using her affair not just to escape her marriage, but to secure her future, one where Ethan was no longer part of the picture. She had convinced herself that she could have both, that she could keep her life with him and her life with William, and when it all fell apart, she would still land on her feet. Ethan's stomach churned as he pieced this together. She had been playing a dangerous game, and now he was the one who had to deal with the wreckage. But this also meant that he had something powerful on his side: knowledge. He knew Sarah better than anyone else, and in this case, knowing everything was his greatest advantage. Days later, Ethan received the final piece of the puzzle. One of the emails he had uncovered referenced a meeting with a real estate agent, an appointment that Sarah had kept hidden from him. He dug deeper into it, and what he found shocked him. Sarah had been planning to buy a new property with the money she had been siphoning from their joint accounts. It wasn't just for herself. She had intended to move in with William, to start a new life, to leave Ethan behind completely. The plan had been set in motion long before the affair was exposed. Sarah had been plotting her escape, preparing her exit strategy with the precision of a seasoned manipulator. Ethan couldn't believe it. She had been orchestrating her own freedom, using him as a stepping stone, all while pretending to be the loving wife and mother. Ethan sat in his office, staring at the computer screen with a mix of anger and disbelief. He had uncovered everything: the affair, the financial deceit, the hidden property. The price of betrayal. Part 8. The fallout from Sarah's betrayal was far-reaching. Ethan had hoped that, with her public exposure, the layers of lies would begin to peel away, leaving Sarah with nothing but the cold truth to confront. He'd made sure she paid for her deceit. Her affair with William had been exposed in front of friends, colleagues, and even strangers, and her carefully crafted reputation had crumbled. But what Ethan didn't expect, what he didn't prepare for, was that Sarah's hunger for control and her ability to manipulate would never truly end. Months passed after the expose. Ethan thought he had reached the end of the line. He had fought his battles, cleared the air, and had even begun moving forward with his life. The custody battle for their daughter was still ongoing, but he had a sense of closure. He was no longer trapped in a web of lies. Yet, as life began to settle, a dark shadow crept back into his thoughts, a shadow that had been lurking since the day he first discovered Sarah's infidelity. Despite everything, despite the public humiliation and the fractured trust, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was still playing the same game. He knew her too well. There was a certain coldness in her that never quite dissipated, a cunning edge to her smile that made him uneasy. Could she be at it again? Could Sarah be cheating once more, weaving new lies in the aftermath of the wreckage she had caused? It all started with a strange phone call one evening. Ethan was at home, trying to unwind after a long day, when his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. It wasn't unusual for calls to come through. After all, his life had become a whirlwind of lawyers, paperwork, and meetings regarding custody, but this one felt different. He picked up the phone. "Hello? Mr. Davenport," a voice on the other end said, smooth and professional. "This is Detective Claire Matthews. I believe you might remember me from a few months ago." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Detective Matthews had been part of the initial investigation into Sarah's affair, helping him gather evidence against William. Why was she calling now? "I hope I'm not interrupting," she continued. "But I've come across some new information. That might be of interest to you." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of information?" "Well," Matthews hesitated, "I've been looking into some other developments regarding your ex-wife's financial dealings and personal activities. And, Mr. Davenport, it seems there may be more to her story than you realize. It's about another relationship, one that's been kept under wraps." Ethan felt his stomach twist into knots. He knew it. Deep down, he had sensed it. Sarah couldn't stay away from her old habits, her need for control, for secrets. She had been playing him once more. "I don't understand," Ethan said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Are you saying she's been cheating again?" Detective Matthews was quiet for a moment before replying. "Yes, Mr. Davenport, I've been tracking a series of meetings and correspondences between Sarah and a man by the name of Gregory Price. It seems they've been in regular contact for months, and it's not just business, if you get my drift." Ethan's mind raced. Gregory Price. He recognized the name instantly, a man Sarah had met at a charity event last year. At the time, Ethan had been too wrapped up in their own struggles to pay much attention to the new people Sarah was associating with. He had trusted her, maybe too much. "Where is she meeting him?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with anger. Matthews paused again. "I'm still gathering all the details, but it seems they've been seeing each other at various locations. I've got some of their texts, some footage from surveillance cameras showing them leaving hotels and restaurants together. It's a pattern that can't be ignored." Ethan felt as if the floor had been ripped out from under him. His ex-wife, after everything, after the destruction she had caused, was still engaging in deceit. It was worse than betrayal this time. Sarah wasn't just a cheater anymore. She was a liar to the core, incapable of changing, incapable of being honest with anyone, not even herself. But Ethan knew what he had to do. He couldn't let this pass. He couldn't just move on again, not while Sarah was still playing with his life and emotions. He needed to expose her once more, to strip away whatever remained of her power and show the world that she was, in fact, the same woman who had hurt him all over again. The next few days were a blur of gathering evidence, contacting the right people and getting everything in order. Ethan couldn't trust anyone close to Sarah. He had learned that the hard way, but he had a few allies left. One of them was Rachel, his lawyer, who had always been pragmatic and professional, willing to help him with whatever it took to protect their daughter. The Price of Betrayal, Part 9. The silence that followed the second exposé was deafening. Ethan had seen his own reflection in the mirror of his own revenge and realized just how far he was willing to go to make Sarah face the consequences of her actions. The articles, the footage, the interviews, it all played out exactly as he had planned. The world now knew Sarah for what she truly was, and Ethan could feel the weight of her downfall settle over him like a cloak of justice. But despite the sense of victory, there was still a part of him that burned with the need to exact one final measure of revenge. Ethan knew that exposing Sarah's deceitful affairs to the public wasn't enough. No, there was something deeper, a sense of satisfaction, of poetic justice, that he needed to claim for himself. Sarah had humiliated him not just publicly but privately. She had stolen his peace, shattered his trust, and ripped apart the very fabric of his family. Ethan wasn't done with her. She had to feel what he had felt, feel the consequences of her betrayal on every level, emotionally, financially, and socially. The first thing Ethan did was reach out to an old friend, Alex, someone who had worked with him years ago in the corporate world. Alex had connections, the kind of people who could help Ethan bring pressure to bear on Sarah's financial world. He had once been a rising star in the same industry as Sarah, and they had shared mutual respect and professional ties, until she turned her back on their shared past and set her sights on power. "Alex, I need your help," Ethan said, his voice calm, controlled. "It's time to put Sarah in her place. I want to make sure she never forgets what she did to me." Alex didn't hesitate. "What do you need from me?" "I want to hit her where it hurts. I want to expose every shady deal, every questionable investment she's made, and I want it all to surface at the right time. I want her to pay for every cent she stole from me while she was playing her games." Ethan wasn't just angry anymore. He had transcended that anger and turned it into something far more dangerous: strategic coldness. He knew Sarah's business affairs inside and out, and now, thanks to his newfound allies, he was going to use her own success to bring her to her knees. Months earlier, Ethan had discovered that Sarah had manipulated several financial reports, hiding substantial amounts of money in overseas accounts. He'd seen the signs of her involvement in dubious real estate transactions and stock manipulations, just enough to put her under scrutiny if anyone ever dug deep enough. The problem was, no one had. Until now. Working with Alex, Ethan set in motion a series of legal maneuvers, all designed to bring Sarah's shady dealings to light. First, they targeted Sarah's company, the one she had built with her affair partner, William. The company had prospered, but its success was built on fraud, not on merit. Ethan had enough evidence to send it crashing down, and he was determined to see it happen. He worked with Alex to gather a legal team, specialists in corporate law, finance, and forensic accounting, to trace every transaction Sarah had ever made. They had the leverage they needed, and the team wasted no time in preparing the necessary court filings. It wasn't about wealth for Ethan. It was about revenge. Meanwhile, as the financial investigation was unfolding behind the scenes, Ethan shifted his attention to Sarah's personal life. He had watched her for years, seen the way she manipulated those around her, the way she played the victim to those who had once trusted her. Ethan had been one of those people. But now, he had the tools to turn the tables on her. He began to focus on her friends, her inner circle, the people she'd lied to, the people who had helped her maintain the facade of the perfect wife, the doting mother. Ethan knew that Sarah's relationships with these people were her last line of defense. If he could expose the lies she'd told them, show them the extent of her manipulation, it would isolate her completely. Ethan contacted a few of Sarah's closest friends, ones who had stood by her during the aftermath of their divorce. He didn't expect much. Most of them were still loyal to her, still blinded by the woman she had presented herself to be. But there was one person who would listen. A woman named Jenna, a close friend from their early years together. Jenna had always suspected that there was more to Sarah's story than she let on, and Ethan knew that she had some lingering doubts. He reached out to Jenna one evening, his voice steady, but laced with a quiet fury. "Jenna, I need you to listen carefully," he began. "I've uncovered everything. Sarah has been lying to all of you. She's been using her charm to keep you all in the dark. But it's time for the truth to come out." At first, Jenna resisted, refusing to believe what Ethan was telling her. But as Ethan laid out the evidence, texts, photos, The Price of Betrayal, Part 10. As the final pieces of Sarah's world crumbled beneath the weight of Ethan's meticulous plans, he couldn't help but feel the quiet ache that lingered within him. Revenge, though satisfying in the moment, had left him with a hollow sense of victory. In the weeks that followed, Ethan spent long nights reflecting on the path he had taken. He had destroyed Sarah's reputation, exposed her lies, and seen her financially and emotionally devastated. But what had he truly gained? The image of his daughter, Lily, kept returning to him. She was the one person he hadn't hurt in this whirlwind of chaos. But what would this all mean for her? Would she remember the mother who had been caught in betrayal, or would she remember the man who had torn apart everything in his pursuit of vengeance? Lily had been just a child when Sarah left, but she was growing up fast. The custody battle had been hard on both of them, but now, with Sarah's disgrace hanging in the balance, Ethan wondered how this would affect Lily's future. The child who once looked up to her mother with admiration was now faced with the reality of the woman she had trusted being exposed for her lies. Ethan knew he couldn't change what had happened, but he could control how he moved forward with Lily. He had to be the one to guide her through the fallout. He couldn't let her carry the weight of Sarah's betrayal any more than he already had. One day, as the final court decisions regarding custody were made, Ethan took Lily to the park. It was a warm afternoon, and as they sat on the swings, he realized how much he had missed out on during the years of his marriage. Those small moments with her, the quiet conversations, the moments where it was just the two of them, he had taken them for granted. Now those were the moments that meant everything. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" Lily's voice, small but clear, broke through his thoughts. She was staring at the ground, her fingers wrapped tightly around the swing's chains. Ethan took a deep breath. He had asked himself that question 1,000 times over the past few years. Would they be okay? "We are," he said, his voice firm but full of conviction. "I promise you, we'll be okay. We have each other, and that's all we need." Lily nodded slowly, though her eyes betrayed a sense of uncertainty. The world she had known was shifting, and even though Ethan had fought for her future, there was still an undercurrent of sadness in her heart. Sarah's betrayal, her absence, hung like a dark cloud between them, and Lily wasn't sure how to navigate the storm. Ethan could see the hurt in her eyes, and it gnawed at him. He hadn't been the perfect father, but he could be better. He could be the stability Lily needed. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be there for her. He would make sure of it, no matter what it took. In the weeks following the finalization of the custody battle, Ethan shifted his focus from vengeance to healing. He knew that revenge had given him a brief sense of closure, but it hadn't freed him from the anger that had fueled him. Now the true work began, the work of healing, not just for him, but for Lily as well. He started to reframe his thoughts, slowly letting go of the bitterness that had driven him for so long. He took up activities that brought him peace, things that had been lost during his marriage to Sarah, like painting, hiking in the woods, and cooking meals for himself and Lily. He spent more time with his daughter, helping her navigate her emotions and showing her that the love they shared was enough to weather the storms they had faced. One evening, as they sat down to a simple dinner of spaghetti and garlic bread, Lily spoke again, this time with a quiet strength in her voice. "Dad, I think I'm starting to understand." "Understand what, sweetheart?" Ethan asked, a little surprised. "That it's okay to let go. Mom, she was always so distant, and I think I thought I needed her. But I don't. Not if she's not going to be there for us. We've got each other, and that's enough." Ethan's heart swelled with pride. He hadn't realized how much his daughter had grown, how much she had learned through the upheaval in their lives. She was resilient, stronger than he could have imagined. "You're right," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've got each other, and that's all we'll ever need." As time passed, the scars from Sarah's betrayal slowly began to fade. Ethan still carried the memories of the pain, the sense of loss, and the long nights spent questioning everything. But now, he saw them for what they were, lessons, painful but necessary lessons. They had shaped him into the man he had become, the father who would do anything for his daughter's happiness. Ethan's journey wasn't over. There were still moments of grief, times when the weight of everything that had happened would come crashing back. But those moments were fewer now. The Price of Betrayal, Part 11. As the days passed, Ethan continued to rebuild, piece by piece, not just his own life, but Lily's too. Their bond had deepened in ways he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the shared experience of overcoming adversity. It was the trust that had formed between them, the quiet understanding that no matter what, they had each other. Ethan had always been a private person, but with Lily's growth and their newfound bond, he began to open up more, to her, to himself, and even to a few close friends who had been there when his world had fallen apart. The walls he had spent so long building around his emotions slowly began to crumble, and with every new connection, every honest conversation, he began to realize how much he had buried beneath the surface. But there was still one thing that gnawed at him, a shadow in the back of his mind. It was the unfinished business with Sarah. He had exposed her, destroyed her life, and watched as she had been left with nothing. Yet deep inside, Ethan still wasn't sure if he had done enough to truly sever the hold she had once had on him. Had he done it all for revenge? Or had there been a part of him that still sought some sort of closure, a desire to ensure she could never come back into their lives again? One evening, as Ethan was walking Lily to her bedroom after a long day, his phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen. It was a message from his lawyer, Rachel. He hadn't heard from her in a while, and the last time they'd spoken, things had been quiet on the legal front. "Call me when you get this. It's about Sarah." Ethan's stomach clenched. There was no way Sarah could have come back into the picture now, not after everything that had happened. But something about the way Rachel's message read sent a chill through him. He stepped outside to make the call, his breath visible in the cool evening air. "Rachel, what's going on?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Things have changed," she said, her voice tinged with hesitation. "I know you've moved on from all this, Ethan, but Sarah's in trouble, and I think it's something you might want to know." Ethan's mind raced. "What kind of trouble?" "There's been an incident. It's complicated, but she's been arrested, and there's more to it than what you might think. She's in serious financial trouble, and from what we're hearing, some of her shady business dealings are coming back to haunt her. I'm not sure how deep it goes, but if you don't act quickly, you might lose the opportunity to protect Lily." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his chest. This wasn't just another chapter in Sarah's downfall. This was something far worse. "What do you mean, protect Lily?" "Sarah's name is tied to a larger criminal investigation," Rachel continued. "And now it seems the authorities are going after everyone involved. That includes you, since her financials were often intertwined with yours during your marriage." Ethan's mind reeled. This wasn't about his vendetta against Sarah anymore. It was about his daughter. Lily could be dragged into this mess in ways he couldn't even fathom. The last thing he wanted was for her to be caught up in any of the fallout from Sarah's mistakes. "Do I need to worry about custody?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. "I think we should prepare for the worst. If Sarah is facing charges and it gets public, it could affect your case. We need to act fast to ensure that Lily's future is protected from whatever's coming next." That night, Ethan sat in the living room, his mind swirling with the possibilities of what Rachel had just told him. He thought he had put Sarah behind him, that he had won. Hadn't he already done enough to protect his daughter from her? But now Sarah's actions were threatening to upend everything once again. He glanced over at Lily, who was sitting on the couch, lost in a book. She looked so peaceful, so unaware of the storm that was brewing. Ethan knew that he had to keep her safe, no matter what it took. He couldn't let Sarah's choices destroy the life they had built together. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Lily's voice. She looked up from her book, her brow furrowed in curiosity. "Dad, is everything okay? You seem worried." Ethan forced a smile, his heart heavy with the weight of his thoughts. "Yeah, sweetheart. Everything's fine. I just need to take care of a few things, but don't worry. Nothing's going to change." Lily nodded, but Ethan could tell she was sensing something was off. She always had a way of seeing through his lies, even the smallest ones. He sighed inwardly. No more secrets. He had promised himself, and he had promised her, that their lives would no longer be tangled in the web of deceit and betrayal. Yet, here they were again, with Sarah's choices threatening to drag them both into a nightmare once more. The following days were a whirlwind. The Price of Betrayal. Part 12. The weeks following the news of Sarah's legal troubles were the most challenging Ethan had faced in a long time. Despite his best efforts to focus on protecting Lily, his own emotional turmoil bubbled just beneath the surface. Every call with Rachel, every new piece of information that came through about Sarah's financial web, felt like another weight pressing down on him. Ethan had fought to rebuild his life after Sarah's betrayal, but now it felt like her mistakes were creeping back into their world, threatening everything he had worked so hard to protect. And yet, he knew that the worst part wasn't the looming legal threats or the public spectacle of Sarah's downfall. The hardest part was watching Lily, growing ever more perceptive as she noticed the cracks in their once stable world. One evening, after a particularly grueling day filled with meetings with lawyers and calls to the private investigator, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee he had long since forgotten to drink. His mind was racing, trying to figure out the next steps in ensuring Lily's future remained safe, when Lily's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Dad, I know something's going on," she said, standing in the doorway of the kitchen. Her expression was serious, mature beyond her years. Ethan sighed. The weight of the conversation he had been dreading had finally arrived. He set down the cup and turned to face her, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth he could no longer hide. "Sweetheart," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "I wish I could shield you from all of this, but sometimes things happen that are out of our control. Your mom, she's in a lot of trouble, but I promise you, we'll be okay. I'm doing everything I can to protect us." Lily stepped into the kitchen, her small hands clasped together in front of her. "Is this about what happened with her? And the other stuff? The stuff I don't really understand?" Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He had been careful not to share too much about Sarah's betrayal, about the affair and the financial mess that had followed. But Lily was smarter than he had given her credit for, and now the truth was becoming unavoidable. "Yes," he said. "I know this is confusing and it's hard to make sense of it all. But the most important thing for you to know is that I am here. You don't have to worry about anything. Whatever happens, I'll make sure you're safe." Lily's eyes searched his face, looking for something, maybe reassurance, maybe an answer to the question that had been hanging in the air between them for so long. "Dad, do you think Mom will come back?" she asked, her voice small, unsure. Ethan felt the ache of her question deep in his chest. His daughter had been through enough, and he hated that she still clung to the hope that Sarah might return. He wasn't sure whether Sarah would ever come back into their lives in any way, but he knew it was time to finally put an end to Lily's uncertainty. "I don't know," Ethan said, his voice calm, though there was a bitter edge to it. "What I do know is that you and I have each other, and that's all we need." Lily seemed to take comfort in his words, even though a part of her still held on to the dream of a happy family with both parents. Ethan could see that this wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the fracture of her sense of safety, of the world she had once known. "Thanks, Dad," Lily said quietly, before turning back to her room. Ethan sat back in his chair, his hands trembling slightly. He had given Lily what she needed in that moment, but he could see that the damage done to her sense of security wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. He couldn't afford to let Sarah's mistakes define their future. The next few days were filled with more legal wrangling. Rachel continued to gather information, and with every new revelation about Sarah's business dealings, Ethan's resolve strengthened. He wouldn't let Sarah drag them down again. But despite the professional facade he had perfected, the emotional weight of everything still loomed large. He was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally, but he couldn't stop now, not when there was so much at stake. One evening, while going through some of the paperwork Rachel had sent him, Ethan found a document that caught his eye. It was a transcript of an interview between Sarah and one of her business associates, an older man named Gregory Donnelly, who had been involved in the shady real estate transactions Ethan had uncovered years earlier. As he read the transcript, a dark realization began to form in his mind. Sarah hadn't just been involved in unethical business practices. She had been using her position and connections to further her own agenda, manipulating others along the way. The Price of Betrayal. Part 13. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan and Lily continued to navigate the aftermath of Sarah's betrayal. The legal battles surrounding Sarah's business dealings, her arrest, and the collateral damage to her reputation and finances gradually faded from the headlines. Sarah, now facing the consequences of her actions, became more of a distant memory than an active threat. For Ethan, the worst was behind them. He had faced down the demons of the past, confronted the pain of betrayal head-on, and done everything in his power to shield Lily from the fallout. The path wasn't easy, but slowly, the darkness had begun to lift. Ethan found himself thinking more about the future than the past. There had been a time when all he could focus on was the destruction that Sarah had brought into their lives. Now, with every new day, the possibility of healing seemed more real. He wasn't just living in survival mode anymore. He was actively rebuilding, and he was doing it with Lily. The two of them had settled into a routine. Lily was thriving in school, her bright personality and intelligence drawing the admiration of her teachers and classmates. Her laughter, once quiet and hesitant, had returned in full force. There was still sadness in her eyes at times, but there was also a resilience that Ethan hadn't seen in her before. And for Ethan, his life was slowly finding its balance. He continued to paint, the art now becoming more of an expression of his healing than of his grief. He had even started taking on new clients, rediscovering the joy of work that didn't carry the weight of his past. In the quiet moments, when he sat with a brush in hand, the years of turmoil and pain seemed to dissipate, replaced by the feeling of moving forward. One afternoon, as Ethan stood in his studio, painting the canvas in front of him, he heard a familiar knock at the door. It was Rachel, his lawyer, with an urgent look on her face. She had become more than just his legal counsel over the past few months. She had become a trusted confidant, someone who understood the depths of his struggles and victories. "Ethan," Rachel began, stepping inside, "I need to talk to you about something important, something that's come up with Sarah's case." Ethan set the brush down, feeling the familiar tension tighten in his chest. "What is it?" Rachel sat down, a solemn expression on her face. "It seems like Sarah is trying to make a comeback. She's trying to leverage the situation to get some of her assets back. And there's a chance she might try to challenge the custody arrangement, especially now that things have settled in her legal case." Ethan's gut tightened. He had worked so hard to protect Lily, and the thought of Sarah coming back into their lives, especially in a way that might harm her, was unbearable. "What's the likelihood of that happening?" "It's hard to say," Rachel replied, "but we need to be prepared. She's resourceful, and if she's as desperate as we think she is, she could make a play to regain some of her standing. You need to be ready to fight if it comes to that." Ethan felt the familiar surge of anger and anxiety. He had thought that after everything that had happened, Sarah would have learned her lesson, that she would stay out of their lives for good. But now, it seemed like that hope might be too idealistic. "I don't want Lily anywhere near her," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I've already given her more chances than she deserved. I won't let her hurt my daughter again." Rachel nodded, understanding the depth of Ethan's resolve. "I'll make sure we're ready if she does try something, but, Ethan, I know you're thinking about this, and it's important, but you can't let her continue to occupy space in your mind. You've made progress, and Lily is doing well because of your focus on her and her future." Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes as the weight of the situation settled in. "I just don't know if I can ever fully trust her again. She's been nothing but destructive." "You don't have to trust her," Rachel said softly. "But you can make sure she doesn't have the power to destroy your future, or Lily's." Ethan's thoughts swirled. His instinct was to fight, to push back at all costs to protect Lily. But Rachel's words echoed in his mind, and he realized something. Maybe the true victory wasn't in continuing to battle Sarah or dragging her through more legal battles. Maybe it was in showing that he could move forward, in letting go of the anger and finally putting the past where it belonged. The following days were filled with decisions. Ethan met with Rachel several more times, preparing for any potential legal battle that might arise from Sarah's actions. But in the back of his mind, he focused on what really mattered: Lily's well-being and the life they were building together.